All right, back with another edition of the sort of playoff picture preview. I use the ESPN Playoff Machine and just give my picks for how I think each game the next 3 weeks now will go. It's obviously not an exact science, but to me, what's more interesting about this is less the predictions side of things, because obviously I'm not going to guess every single game right down the stretch, and more so just kind of gives us an idea of what teams have to do down the stretch to make the playoffs. So yeah, I think it's a fun exercise. Let's just get into it, starting off with the NFC. So yeah, NFC, you see, I do have the San Francisco 49ers continuing to win out. That's all they have to do. They win out, they would get the 1 seed, and the Packers would get Packers, that would be wild. The Eagles would get the 2 seed. Now, I did have to mention, it's not locked in. I mean, in fact, on Christmas, Ravens 49ers, that could actually determine the 1 seed on either side. I mean, because the Ravens still have they would have to lose 2 games to lose out on a 1 seed, but they still do have the Dolphins on their schedule as well. More on that later. But, that could be, determining who gets the 1 seed, across conferences, which you don't usually see that. For the Eagles, all they need is the Niners to lose 1 game. They would jump up to the 1 seed. The Lions are almost for sure locked into the 3 seed at this point. As you see, I do have Tampa Bay winning the division at 9-8 and getting the 4 seed. First time since I've been doing this exercise, which I started 2/3 of the way through the season, I've had a different team than Atlanta winning the NFC South, interestingly enough. We'll get more into that once I go to the whole conference. But you see, Dallas I also have as the 5 seed. It's totally possible for them to find a way to get the 2 seed. They do have some work, though. After losing this one, they're going to need Philadelphia to drop a couple of the next 2 games, which is possible. They play Seattle. They still have 4 games because they have to play tonight. So, it's not out of the, it's not crazy to think it could happen, but seems like they're pretty locked into the 5 seed, which honestly might not be the worst case scenario, playing the NFC South team instead of playing the 7 seed. Although, I don't know, records are the same. It might not be that big of a deal, but, just something to note. You see, I do still have Green Bay making it, and I have Los Angeles making it. Let's get into the entire, conference so we can talk about the wild cards and all that stuff. So here we are, NFC East. You see that, I already talked about Philadelphia and Dallas on the top left, so let's go down to NFC West, where Los Angeles and Seattle, I have both going 9-8. There's a lot of teams that are fighting for, this situation, fighting to try and see if they can get into the playoffs. All of the wild card contenders, I would put them as, Dallas, they're in. So for the other 2 spots, it's the Rams, the Seahawks, the Packers, the Vikings, and then 2 out of the 3 NFC South teams, because they would all have chances to win. So going through it, the Rams, they should be good. I have them losing the final game of the season to the Niners, but who knows? Maybe they have the 1 seed locked up and rest their starters. I think at that point they'd probably play their starters to some point, but maybe they're going to take their foot off the gas. You can get an extra win there, make it easier, but they feel okay as long as they just win their next 2 games. They play the Saints, which is not a guaranteed win, but if they can win that on Thursday, they beat the Giants, they're probably in. And also, you notice I still do have Green Bay making it. I have them winning out, which seems like a hot take, but they play the Panthers, the Vikings, and the Bears, so that's kind of why I have it going that way. The Vikings I have losing out, but again, they play the Lions twice and they play the Packers. So a lot of divisional matchups. Maybe they can find a way to steal a couple of those games. They would have to steal at least 2, I think. If they were to beat Green Bay week 17, then Seattle would actually jump both of those teams and they would get into the 7 seeds. So for Minnesota, it would take more than just that. However, if they can just split the series against the Lions and beat Green Bay, which isn't out of the question, they would still get a wild card spot. So definitely some ways for Minnesota to get in. For Seattle, again, Green Bay loses 1 more game, they're in. Los Angeles loses 1 more game, they're in. Or if they win 1 more game, then they would be in. They play, Philadelphia tonight, which that could be a win. They do that, they would get the 6th seed and play Detroit, which I do think there is a difference between the 6th seed and the 7th seed. I would rather play Detroit than Philadelphia, so that's interesting to note as well. As for the NFC South, the one I kind of glossed over a little bit, a lot of intrigue. All 3 of these teams still do have a chance. Atlanta did really screw themselves this week. They did. For one thing, Tampa Bay and New Orleans play each other week 17. So for Tampa Bay, they control their own destiny. For New Orleans, they control their own destiny. Atlanta does not. They do not control their own destiny for the NFC South. There is a scenario where they win out and do not get this division, and it's also kind of hard to envision them winning out. Now, you see I have the Saints going 7-10, but that could easily swing the other way. If they beat Tampa Bay and Atlanta the final 2 games of the season, then they're in. Then they're the 4 seed. If they beat Tampa Bay and then Atlanta beats the Saints, actually Atlanta can still get into the division with an 8-9 record. Atlanta is not dead yet. I'm also projecting the Colts to beat the Falcons the final game of the season, which I don't know if it wouldn't actually matter if everything else I predict holds the same, then you're still looking at a Tampa Bay division winner. However, again, if you can beat the Colts, if you're the Falcons next week, everything else holds except for the Saints beating the Buccaneers week 17, then they can get in. So there is still avenues for the Falcons, but it seems most likely that the winner of the week 17 matchup would be the division winner in the NFC South. And there is even a scenario where it becomes a straight up, playoff game in that, situation. So, a lot of different things can happen here. Moving over to the AFC now, you see I do have Baltimore getting the 1 seed. They have a 2-game lead currently. I have it dropping to a 1-game lead, but still getting the division. Now, it's closer than you might realize. I know a lot of people kind of feel like, Baltimore, 2-game lead with 3 games to go. It's over. Well, not exactly. Kansas City has a pretty easy schedule. If they can go 3-0, then Baltimore would have to go 2-1, which still seems reasonable, but they play San Francisco and then Miami. If they drop both of those games, even if they win their third, it would be 12-5. Them, Miami, and Kansas City would all then be 12-5. Baltimore would drop all the way to the 3 seed. Miami to 2 seed. Kansas City can still get the 1 seed. That is still very much in the cards. And in fact, there's a scenario where if that does happen, if Baltimore beats Miami and you just get 1 Chiefs loss along the way, then Miami could still get the 1 seed. So that's still in the cards. Jacksonville not mathematically eliminated from the 1 seed, but seems unlikely. Feels like the most likely scenario is they end up as the 4 seed. That's not even guaranteed, though. In fact, they could get lower than that. They play Tampa Bay next week, who's on a bit of a heater. And if that flips the other way, this is a crazy thing to point out. If everything else holds, all my predictions hold, but Jacksonville just loses to Tampa Bay in Tampa Bay, then they'd be out of the playoffs altogether. Like, that's how close these AFC teams are. You also notice I do have Cleveland, Indianapolis, and Denver as the 3 wildcard teams. But let's, again, get to the conference where we can talk about all of it. So going over here, you notice that, again, a lot of different teams that are in the hunt right here. A couple teams that I didn't even mention, Buffalo, Cincinnati, and Houston, all have real chances to get in. I think that I did not end up putting in there. I have Buffalo and I have Cincinnati actually going 10-7, but that wouldn't get them in, and Houston going 9-8. For Buffalo, some of their pathways to talk about is if they beat Miami, which is the last game of the season, and everything else holds, they would get the 4 seed in that scenario. They would win the division. So that could be a scenario where they lose, they don't win the division and are out of the playoffs, but if they win their division and host a playoff game, Miami would still make the playoffs in that scenario as the 7 seed if everything else hold as you would think it would. For Denver, if they lose a game, they would be knocked out. Actually, Cincinnati, if all my other predictions hold, they would be a team that would end up getting into the playoffs in that scenario. And if they lost another game, then Buffalo could still get in. So Buffalo probably needs to win that last game or get a decent amount of help here, but at least you control your own destiny with that win over Dallas. For Cincinnati, it's worth mentioning, I have them winning against the Browns the final game of the season. That game could go either way, but they also play the Chiefs, which usually I've been kind of feeling like, okay, that's going to be tough. That's probably not going to happen. However, as we've kind of seen, Chiefs are a lot more human. If they can win that one, they could win out, go 11-6. That would be enough for them to make the playoffs. So that's certainly possible. For the teams I do have making it, as I said, I have Cleveland losing a game that I thought could go either way. I also have them beating the Texans week 16. But even if they lost that, they would still be in the playoffs, although the Texans would also then join the playoffs in that scenario. That's probably the easiest pathway for Houston to get in is a victory there. So there's all of that to talk about. because again, there's honestly millions of different ways this could play out. I just try to talk about the most, the most common ones, the most possible ones is kind of how I view all of this. As for the Colts, it seems like their easiest way to get knocked out. So I had them beating Atlanta, as I mentioned. That is a game that could go either way. Even if that did flip, though, they would still be in, and even if they would still be the 6th seed, in fact. So you're still in an okay spot. The Colts are in a pretty good spot. However, if they lost that game and lost another one of the 2, I have them beating Houston as well. It's somewhat plausible they could lose in that scenario. And in fact, here's the interesting way. Here's actually the way that they could probably get knocked out is if they lose to Houston the final game of the season, Houston would take the 6th seed, Indianapolis would drop all the way out of the playoffs. Denver would keep the 7th seed in a weird sort of situation there. So that's kind of the way they could get knocked out is, they're going to have to beat Houston week 18, it seems like, which in the past I had Houston winning, but now given the kind of injury situation to Houston, I think I feel more comfortable picking Indianapolis, but it could go either way. So as always, we're going to end with the, big games for the future for next week. First, I should mention, obviously, the Monday night game, Eagles, Seahawks, big for the 1 seed, Eagles trying to get the 1 seed, and big for the Seahawks. If they can flip that one, they're probably in the playoffs. So that one's huge. The Rams and Saints game is huge. 2 teams trying to make the playoffs, and actually, in a weird way, I've been looking through all the Tampa Bay stuff because I'm a Tampa Bay fan, and it feels like, in a weird way, Tampa Bay might actually want the Saints to win, because either way, Tampa Bay needs to just beat the Saints and Panthers the final 2 games of the season to win the division, but with a Saints victory, it hurts the Rams, making a wild card berth a lot more possible. Just interesting, kind of weird angle there. The Browns and Texans is huge. Could, again, if everything else holds, that would be the difference in the Browns dropping from the 5 seed to the 6 seed and the Texans making the playoffs altogether. So a lot of intrigue with that one. Colts, Falcons, as I mentioned, that wouldn't get the Falcons in. They would still need more, but it would make it easier for them. So that's interesting. Plenty of other games that are kind of obviously, important, like Jaguars, Buccaneers, as I mentioned. Jacksonville needs to, win the games they need to win to make the playoffs. Lions, Vikings, as I mentioned, could be interesting. But then also, Ravens, 49ers, huge game on Christmas night. It should be fun. But yeah, those are my thoughts on all of this. What are yours? Let me know in the comments below. Always love hearing from ya. And of course, as always, thanks for watching.